everybody. Thanks a million for joining us today. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Aine O'Dea. Anya, thank you so much for popping on with us.
Thanks, Una. It's lovely to be here today.
Thank you. So, Anya is going to give us a whistle stop tour of as much tips and techniques that you can around executive functioning and how that can be integrated, for all of us, not even for kids, for any age group, really, as an overview. So, Anya, do you want to maybe kick us off and to give us a little bit of background to yourself, what kind of areas you're involved in and where you're at the moment?
Super. Thanks, Una. So my background is that I'm an occupational therapist in a way by trade, and I've gone on and done lots of other things. Now I work predominantly as a coach with allied health professionals and people in business and in the workplace, coaching them to support them to make better decisions, to prioritize, to look at workload, all of those pieces around communication and make life, I suppose, easier to manage in the work, the multitude of things that we have to do. But I suppose, how did I end up going from occupational therapy to that? It has been a long journey, really. When I was working as an occupational therapist, I actually had quite a significant car crash back in 2008, which meant that I was out of work for a couple of years after the car crash, had a head injury, and then couldn't go back to doing what I'd previously done. Now, I did go back, but I knew myself it was time limited. Like physically, I just was not able for the physicality of working with children and young people as an occupational therapist. So I suppose when things settled, I went back and I did my master's and then really, really enjoyed that academic side. And then after my master's, had my first baby and then went back again after my second baby and started the PhD.
Yeah.
And I did a PhD with the Health Research Board, which is our national, they're under the Department of Health, and they provide a lot of our research across population health and health service research topics. So I was really grateful to get that opportunity because it's quite a prestigious opportunity and there's not many people. And I was the first occupational therapist in Ireland to get that. So that was an amazing opportunity. It was really incredible. Such a great learning journey. PhD, when that finished in 2020, that is when I decided to go out into business on my own. And I'd always worked, I suppose, as a clinical supervisor. I love that element of coaching and bringing all of those OT skills that we have into the workplace. So, looking at the environment where people are working, both the physical, social, cultural, looking at the people, all the things that we have to do, and looking at the occupations of the tasks. And I suppose bringing all the neuroscience that I have with that and then merging that with coaching as well. So I'm an accredited coach, and I would have gone back and done my postgraduate in and received a coaching diploma from UCD from Smurfit Business School. So needless to say, you can see that I love education.
I want to vouch for that too, as you can see, the total education addict. And I suppose on that, Anya, there's two massive things to highlight to maybe some of our listeners. One is obviously the traumatic experience and a physical issue happening and how that kind of can impact us and knock us back. And two, very much so as you're kind of ever striving and developing an educational path and then moving in lots of different directions. And I suppose the resilience piece is something obviously very important in the area we work with students with learning difficulties, that kind of resilience to move through challenges, but then also as you mentioned, having that kind of distributed it's a distributed educational experience and that learning environment is very important for all of us.
Absolutely. And even when you say that after the car crash, like I couldn't read, I could not hold my attention at all to read. And I suppose as somebody who had always enjoyed reading for pleasure, not academic reading, just reading for pleasure, that really bothered me because I didn't have, I would start reading, and I mean a really small piece, and I would just lose my attention. I couldn't keep the working memory to actually focus and read what was on it. And I remember probably about a year later after the crash, I remember getting to the point of where I started reading. I suppose this was in '09, so Harry Potter was really big at that stage. And I went back to reading the first Harry Potter book. And
Okay.
my goal at that stage was to be able to read one page a day. It
Amazing.
was like, that piece of just so slow pacing and just really having to go back to build those cognitive skills. So I had a huge interest in executive functioning, I suppose, clinically, but then I really saw the impact of it on the back of the head injury as well. That actually it took so much time to, in a way, just redevelop those skills to actually be able to manage them on a day-to-day basis myself.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, as you said, just the little bits, and often, we would work with students, some love reading and some find it obviously very challenging, and just that little bit at a time. Sometimes it's just a paragraph a day. Now, the fanaticness of Harry Potter is still very much prevalent, but they're
Mm,
not easy books to read, I don't think. Anyway, I definitely tried to look at them when I was younger and I was like, I don't know any of these words. So it's not like it's a walk in the park, but as you say, breaking things down into smaller tasks so that things then become a little bit easier then.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Fabulous. So I suppose from an executive functioning aspect, Anya, maybe you could talk us through maybe what that is for any listeners that isn't aware what executive functioning is, and its impact on us maybe in a day-to-day context.
So, executive functioning skills are all of those thinking skills, or sometimes you'll hear them called cognitive skills or brain skills. But they're all those thinking skills that we use on a day to day basis that help us to get things done. And the thinking skills that help us to get things done are our working memory, that I can hold a little bit of members and do something with it, like act on it. So remember, that, oh yes, Una just asked me to click record, or, I'm making that up. But if you did, that I would actually remember to do that and use that information. So for kids in the school setting, it's going to be all about like they're constantly getting instructions and information. What do I need to do right now? In the workplace, you'll see for adults in a meeting, taking notes, listening, and being able to put that information with some other information that I know already or that I've previously heard and be able to respond and reply to, something with regard to a project or something I have to do. Other executive functioning or thinking skills that we use on a day to day basis then are planning and organization skills. So they help us to plan out, what do I need to do first? What do I need for this task? And then to organize that and actually do it. So we see it for kids and adolescents all the time. They may not actually plan what they need. They may not bring their belongings to school. They may not plan out that, this project needs to be done next week, so I need to start it now and break it down into chunks. And then how do I organize that information? You
Yeah.
might see those organization skills in their writing as well, that their writing can be very disorganized. There's no flow to it. And that piece when somebody says to them of like, well, the introduction, the middle, and the end of a paragraph, it just doesn't really mean anything. It's like it's just all there. We see it also then in other aspects in everyday life is that piece of being able to initiate. That's a really important executive functioning skill. So starting something, initiating, oh, I need to do that now. So you often have skill from what am I? Oh, I'm currently reading something that I'm really enjoying, but I need to stop that now and move on and actually do what needs to be done. I have to finish coloring, I have to finish this task, and I need to start something else. So, in with that, there's other thinking skills that, and they're often used together, like that bit of inhibit, like, oh, yes, I want to keep going with this, but I have to inhibit that response and actually start something else. Other thinking or executive functioning skills that we have when we're talking impulsivity, the ability to be able to control our impulses. And that can be anything around, you see it for not just for kids and adolescents, you see it for adults as well. The impulse to actually pause. I want to tell you right now everything that's in my head. So the impulse to be able to wait and not just say it immediately. The impulse, to like you often see the graphic of like, do not push this button, and then the person pushes the button. But the impulse to be able to wait and know that, oh, I can do that in a minute. So for control can be really challenging, and especially in the school situation, they can get caught with it and get in trouble because they might be the one that somebody else says to them, oh, pull their chair, and then they do it because it's funny, or the impulse to go, oh, I'll just write that down quickly now, or send that, or do whatever. So impulse control is a really important thinking skill that we use and one of our executive functioning skills. So there's a wide array of these skills that we use, and often you'll hear them talked about maybe in isolation or as like individual skills. But the reality is that they all actually work together and they support each other. My working memory supports impulse control because if I struggle to remember it, then I'm going to possibly be more impulsive because if I don't say it immediately, I know I'll have forgotten it. So we see them work together, like planning and organization is so important, and initiation also feeds into that task completion as well. So that's just a very brief overview of it. But these are the skills that you see that help us to get everyday life activities done and completed.
Fabulous, Sonia, and such a great overview, really into the practicalities, because often we attach words to something, but maybe it isn't explained as to how important it is in both, an academic setting and for everyday life, for anybody, for a parent and for a teacher. So after
Oh,
we looked at, I suppose,
absolutely.
the overview, what might be some of your suggestions on it, maybe for people that struggle in this area, either, a parent or a teacher watching to help a child, or even themselves, they're struggling with their own day-to-day logistics. What kind of practical tools can be implemented to get off in positive habits in early in the year with that could be implemented, that may make the day a little bit smoother to run through.
Well, I suppose the first bit is to recognize it and to see where's this person getting caught? The child, the adolescent, the adult. And recognize the pattern where you get caught. Is it working memory? My working memory will still catch me. So you will never see me not write down into my diary or into a notebook because otherwise I will forget to do it. And I don't like that. And then that will cause stress and anxiety. So if that's the child or the adolescent or the teacher themselves, what's your trick? So we want to recognize, first of all, which area catches us. And it's often multiple areas. For children and adolescents, these brain skills, think of it like, they're rolling, walking, talking skills. They're developing. The brain is going through massive growth. So for children and adolescents, right up until their mid 20s, we want to be thinking about opportunities for practice.
Yes.
So we want to be creating an environment where I can practice it. So at home, that might be in everyday activities around, having to pack your own lunch. It might be school bag ready. It might be around, what are the chores that you do at home? Everything from sweeping the floor, emptying the dishwasher, walking the dog, you know, activities where you actually have to do something. Because when you're doing a chore, you're using all of those brain skills. You have to start, you have to stay focused, you have to plan, organize. And there's lots of research on that, that actually opportunities for practice are so important for the developing brain. So for children and adolescents, we want to give them opportunities to practice, but we often have to scaffold it. Just kind of like make sure that the environment is well set up. So if I'm doing it, that actually it's easy to empty the dishwasher. I know what I'm doing. It's easy to brush the floor. The brush is there, and so we are controlling the environment a little bit. Same in the school setting. The teacher will often ask, the pile of books is ready there. So they know, where do I start? oh, I start at the front of the classroom, then I'm not just kind of like flitting all over the classroom. And then I go row by row by row. So we're giving opportunities for practice. Then I suppose when we're thinking like the adolescent and the older one, we also want to put in some of those strategies as well that are what we call external strategies, that where we won't be able to maybe rely on our own thinking skills constantly, we'll put in something with it. So we often hear of strategies like checklists and visual schedules, and in theory they all sound amazing, but you have to remember that if the checklist was the be all and end all, somebody would be a millionaire 10 times over. Okay. So there's no perfect checklist, and not all of us will use a checklist every single time. So whenever you hear those strategies, I always say talk to the child and adolescent, because do they know why they're using a visual schedule or a checklist? And that it's not something that's done to them, that it's actually developed with them. What's this checklist for? Is it to help me to get out the door to get ready for school? And actually sit down and work on it together so that it's their words. Yes, the adult can write it if they want, but it's their words, their pictures, and where are they going to put it? Maybe they don't want everybody to see it. Maybe they just want little cues. So things like checklists and planners can be helpful, but they're not, unfortunately, they're not going to like solve and fix this. It's in conjunction, and we need to pick them for specific activities. It's not like everything throughout the day. Where are the key activities that we want to really enhance, and put it with that? Other things, really simple things, even in classroom, like brainstorming and first. And so many teachers do this already. Before they start a new activity, a new learning subject, they'll say to the kids, especially teenagers, like, okay, what do you think this topic is around? What what do you think actually happened, like in order for us to get to the point that we have glaciers? So they'll do a lot of brainstorming around information that people already know. What that does then, it's cueing the brain to remember information at a later time and to pull out my previous knowledge on it. So
Yeah.
brainstorming first is a really good brain friendly activity to help us to retrieve what we know about something or new information. Because when I hear that new information now, because I've been brainstorming first, my brain can hook onto what I know, and it's like a jigsaw piece. The new information can go with some experience that I already have about this. So brainstorming topics, first of all, is really important. Now, they're just three really simple strategies. So I suppose recognize and identify, first of all. Opportunity for practice is number two. Number three is your external strategies like, planning, reminders, brainstorming. And also, I suppose I should say number four, adapting an environment by having awareness and understanding, and adapting it physically and socially as well for people.
Fabulous. Yeah, that's great on you. I suppose it gives us practical tips of as to where to start and how best to continue. I suppose when we're working with students, we often have students in kind of two definitive enough boxes, some that maybe struggle massively with organization and some that might be actually very super often hyper organized,
Yeah,
lists everywhere. There's lists about lists, and particularly I suppose in the start of a year context, there may be all these goals and lists in general for, family or for school or, just even, goals to achieve. What would you suggest maybe for Ani, for people that, maybe are very ingrained in those methods and then maybe get stressed or stretched a little bit then when they don't go according to plan? What tips might be for people that have extended their executive functioning skills?
yet because often we only think of the disorganized person. We don't think that somebody who's hyper organized actually is finding this challenging. So, like, I suppose the first bit is to actually, this is the bit about awareness and compassion, to have that conversation and ask the person and to say to them, I notice you use a lot of lists. Are they helpful? When do they help you? do they ever actually overwhelm you? Which ones do you think you want to hold on to? So in a way, because we're listening first of all. The most important bit is to listen to the child, adolescent, adult. What? Listen, and once we've listened, that will then help us to analyze. What's the core piece here for them? Is it the hyperorganization or the disorganization? So listen first, and if you listen, then you can ask the right question because you've heard what they've spoken about. You can hear like whether they're very overwhelmed or there's specific situations where these lists aren't working. And then you can actually ask the question compassionately. How that help? What do you think might be more effective? So sometimes, when we come in and we think we have the advice and we're ready to give a new strategy, often actually the best strategy there is if we can just pause and listen to their story about school, about work, about their environment, and then help them to analyze what would help you. Because advice can be very difficult to hear, and we're not good at adhering to advice anyway. So I always say listen first and compassion.
Fabulous. Thank you, Anya. And you mentioned kind of throughout the session, particularly for younger students and for parents and even, daily tasks and house things and different bits and pieces. Would you suggest that kind of naturally happens, or is there a particular age range where you feel that is more important to take place? So, for instance, we might still have students that are definitely in primary school, in the younger half, maybe in first and second class, but they're still having their lunch made, getting their bags packed for them, their soccer gear or their ballet gear is ready at the door. And would you suggest trying to integrate those things as soon as possible, or does that kind of depend, I suppose, as well?
Absolutely, as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So these brain skills or thinking skills or executive function skills, they start developing from birth. And there's massive periods of growth. You see it around independence, between preschool and early prime developing. Yes, there's key periods like of growth, but you want to start from like when they're 2, 3, that little bit where they're helping, just even if they just have to lift their bag and bring it to the door. Because when a child first starts to talk and they use single words or even just sounds, everybody's so encouraging of it. And we're like, oh, well, and then we repeat the sound. So imagine that now for these thinking skills, we kind of forget that a little bit. And sometimes if somebody's slow to do it or they find it difficult, so it takes them longer to get dressed, to make their lunch. As adults, we can jump in thinking we're helping and we'll do it quicker and it's easier and we're busy. But actually, what we need to do is go, okay, I'm going to slow that down. I'm going to let them do this piece. And yes, I'll do everything else. But you really want to be thinking about a lifespan approach. So at every age, the younger that they can start helping with everyday jobs, the better, because it's just brain growth and development. And then the whole way up through adolescence, like things like that we take for granted. How do they learn how to use an ATM? How do they learn how to cook? How to put diesel in a car? Cut a lawn, to clean out the oven. All of these are really complex tasks that need a high level of thinking, planning, and problem solving. And what happens is if we don't let them do it, then we don't actually give them the opportunity to fail successfully at home. Because when I'm cleaning out the oven and actually the grease runs down my arm and it's all sticky and ick as a teenager, and I get really frustrated with it, it's like that can be a horrible experience. But at home, it's so scaffolded because actually I can take a break and I can come up with the anger or anxiety and frustration of it. What about now when I'm out in life and I'm 19, 20 on my own? So we want in a way too that these activities that are difficult, they promote a huge opportunity for our mental health and well-being, for our resilience, because it's very scaffolded at home. If I break, burn, half sweep the floor, it's okay. Nobody's really going to, you know, criticize me or give out too much. Parents will encourage and go, come on, we'll try again, go back again. You can do it later. Whereas it's different as an adult. Often it's expected that we'll just get on with it. So we want to give them loads of opportunity, A, to develop those skills, but also so that they learn how to cope with when it's challenging, because they will need more repetitions and they will need a bit more support. So the younger we can start, the better.
Fabulous, on yeah. And I think, as you say, that kind of implementation, and then building things up from a house basis even, builds that resilience then externally so that students feel even at a young age, okay, I can handle these things or I can handle change or transitions because that's kind of implemented as part of their day-to-day logistics. And I suppose
Totally.
just before we wrap up then, Anya, is there anything else that you have upcoming, or is there a website if people have any questions or they'd like to link in with you about how best can they get in touch with you?
And they can drop me an email and consultinghub.com, and my email is anya at radianceconsultinghub.com. So I do talks for different organizations on executive functioning skills, on emotional regulation, because that's a huge part of our executive functioning skills, and sensory issues. So if anybody would like me to speak at an event for them or to do anything like that, I'd be delighted. And they can either drop me an email or reach out to me on socials. I'm on Instagram and on LinkedIn.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing the practical tools, because often things are a little bit difficult to tease apart. So it's great to have practical steps. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for listening, and I hope you found Anya's wealth of suggestions very useful. Obviously, feel free to, either get on to myself or Anya if you have any questions. And we love, reading your comments and seeing how things you implemented, and what kind of top tips or what things you might be able to implement from Anya's section today. If it's one or two practical things that you can implement for yourself or, for a child or for somebody else over the next week. Hopefully that goes well for you, and do share your thoughts with us. Thank you. See you all soon.